What's up, everybody? My name is Billy Boozer, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Hustlemob podcast. Like I mentioned last time, we haven't even come up with a name for this podcast. And so, if you have any ideas, please comment below. Let me know. I think we're kind of thinking about something like bringing hustle back in a very bringing sexy back tone, or everyday hustle, kind of like every day I'm hustling. But we haven't decided, and it should be a fun process to select that thing. And in the true entrepreneurial spirit, I don't like to solve problems until they're problems, right? And it's not really that big of a problem at this moment. And so, like I said, if you have any suggestions, please comment below. I've got an amazing guest today that has probably one of my favorite hustle stories, period. Like maybe ever. And I was only recently introduced to the actual story behind it, but I've known Leroy for a long time. This is Leroy Hite from Cutting Edge Firewood. He has one of the most interesting hustle stories ever, and it really leads up to the culmination of his business. And so why don't you, Leroy, give us a bit of an introduction to who you are, and then we'll jump into what you do every day.
Fantastic. Yes. I'm the founder and CEO of Cutting Edge Firewood. I grew up in Northwest Georgia near Chattanooga, part of a fairly poor family, large, one of 8 kids. And then I
one of 8 kids. I love that. Yes, absolutely. That's so awesome. I did not know that.
Went to Berry College where freshman year, met Billy.
Yeah.
While I was there, well, I got married junior year spring break, something some people don't know about me, and it was planned. Also, while I was there, I started a different firewood company, which is where I actually got the inspiration for Cutting Edge Firewood.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Tell me more real quick about, you were part of one of 8 children in your family. Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned that you grew up fairly, poor, kind of to take your term. So tell me about that. Like, how has that influenced where you are today?
Yeah, it's funny. As a child, I had a great childhood and I have great memories. Spent a lot of time playing outside. Yeah, being one of 8 kids, I definitely had a lot of chores. And I was the oldest son. I was the 5th child, but oldest son. And so I had the bulk of the yard work, and we lived on an acre and we had a small garden. I would spend a couple hours working every day, whether it was moving around mulch, digging ditches, cutting the yard with really crappy equipment. I remember just a funny, real quick story one time. It was probably 8 years ago, used a chainsaw to cut up a tree that had fallen over in my backyard. And I was just like, man, I'd used a chainsaw 1,000 times. I was in the backyard. I was like, this is amazing, because as a kid, I had this dull saw I had to use to cut up trees that would just take hours of just sitting there gnawing at it.
Yeah, but by the end of the summer, you've got giant arms, right?
So, yeah. Yeah, whatever. I was one scrawny kid, but yeah. I definitely learned to hustle. Yeah.
Anytime you're scrawny, it's just you pointing towards your cut, actually. It's real cut up, really defined.
I did have 6-pack abs for sure. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. Tell me more about Cutting Edge Firewood and how you arrived at Cutting Edge Firewood.
What I always like to open up with is really give the vision. And really, when I was in college and had started that firewood company, before we shut it down, I saw the tip of the iceberg of this vision. What that has grown into is a fire is like a beautiful sunset. There's literally no one on earth that dislikes a beautiful fire. You can take a 95-year-old man from Ethiopia and a 3-year-old girl from Georgia. They will both sit in front of a fire and enjoy it. It's universal, it's unifying, and it's primal. After a stressful day, I can sit in front of a fire and my stress level goes down. So my wife can come out and all of a sudden the mood changes and it's romantic. My 3 daughters can come out and make s'mores and memories they will have for a lifetime. And teenagers will actually put their phones down and talk to their parents around the fire. And it can be at the center of a wedding party. And I make incredible food, whether it's steaks, barbecue, or pizza with our cooking wood. And I love on that one side, it's the experience aspect, which is actually our mission statement, and what drives us is the customer experience. I'm all about the customer experience from the beginning to the end. And that's all on one side is the experience. On the other end, what I love about the industry is before we got into it, the industry standard was wood would sit outside for 12 months, rot, literally have mushrooms growing out of it. And the business strategy, the branding, the customer service, and the overall customer experience match that product quality of rotting wood. So that really kind of encapsulates what I love about the firewood and the cooking wood, the experience side, and it was completely undisrupted. There was really no brand. There was no Yeti. There was no Starbucks. There was no Apple of firewood. Try and think of a well-branded firewood company. There's not one till Cutting Edge Firewood.
The only one I can think of is the guy that sits on the back on his tailgate at the whatever corner, every corner in the Southeast during the beginning of or end of the fall, and is selling firewood bundles. That's the only one. That's the brand that I see when I see it.
All that is what really brought me into it. And that plus there's a long story behind this that we won't get into, but I definitely feel like it was my calling in life from God to come in and disrupt the business. So,
well, tell me a little bit about the version that gets you to this, right? Like, were there failures? Were there successes? The thing that you had to beat to get to this point?
I had the previous firewood company while I was in college, got the epiphany, got the inspiration, went and worked in corporate America. I worked at Chick-fil-A for a year, thought about becoming an operator, wasn't for me. I went and worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car for 3 years. Brutal place to work, but learned a lot of good life experience. And then got a job at a corporate company in downtown Atlanta. During that whole time, I was kind of obsessed about fancy firewood. And I was like, dear God, please get this out of my head. This is such a weird obsession. And it would not get out of my head. And so in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, how could I start a firewood company? How could I start a firewood company? Even though I was way too scared to try and start it. My wife and I had joked that when my 93 Geo Prism broke down, super fancy car, 266,000 miles on it. When it broke down, it was going to be $5,000 to fix a car that I sold for scrap metal for $300.
Yeah.
And 2 months in, it broke down. And then that Saturday, my wife went to a baby shower, and I woke up, and I'd never done this before. I woke up and actually fasted the whole day and prayed. And by the end of the day, I decided, you know what? I'm going to step out in a small leap of faith. I think God's calling me to start this business. That's weird. Don't really know what that even means because it's fancy firewood, but I'm going to start this on the side. And talked to my wife about it, went in to work Monday, and they actually fired me on the spot. And I was like, oh, apparently I'm going to be doing this full time and take a big leap of faith.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't even have a plan. Like I was trying to remake a homemade kiln. I thought, I'm going to go up to a supplier that I'd known from my previous experience and hopefully buy some wood from them. Turns out they were out of business. The kiln I was making wasn't working. Spent the whole summer trying to do that. Maxed out a bunch of credit cards, got a personal loan. So I bought a truck, a trailer, and then what's called a Toro Dingo. It's kind of looks like a miniature bobcat.
Okay.
It's tracks on it, and you can put forks on the front of it. And
is
the
this
idea
like when
was
you stand in, not versus sitting in? Okay, yes, I'm familiar.
Yes, correct. Yep. You see landscapers a lot of times using them. It's a crazy story, but the federal government had actually got into regulating firewood because of an invasive species. And long story short, made it where it made sense for a firewood company to be in Atlanta, and they had to have a kiln. And so I wanted kiln dried wood, and they agreed to dry it more for me. And so I'd pay them a little bit more. And it just all kind of came together behind the scenes without really me doing anything. So I would deliver the firewood with that Dingo, had the wood on a pallet in a basket. That first year was just brutal. Deliveries would take 2 hours once I showed up. And it was walking across the yard, carrying firewood in the rain and the snow and the freezing cold just for hours on day. And if I had 8 deliveries, then I would on average be out working for 8 18 hours.
Yeah.
My snowpocalypse happened that January.
Oh, I remember that.
Right.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, this is the Southeast froze over, and we don't handle any frozen anything well. Our roads do not work that way, or our brains don't, whichever one.
I have no problem driving on snow or even ice, but when you throw a few million other people into the mix, gliding all over the place, and you're driving a truck and a trailer, that's like a nightmare scene.
Yeah,
but
I lived in Birmingham at the time, and I lived to get to my house, you had to go to a hill that was like this, and at the bottom of this hill were about 27 cars that had tried it once, and they just bailed on their cars and walked up the hill to go get to their house. So
yeah, I don't want to get into it too much. There's a whole story there, but people would like stop halfway up the hill at a stop sign and then start sliding back towards you. And here I am hauling a bunch of wood and having to like dodge them and stuff. It took me 8.5 hours to get home, but I had to get home because my wife was almost 9 months pregnant. So my oldest daughter was born about a week later. Finished that year, had about $30,000 in the bank account. And I was like, yeah, that's enough money to get me through the year or through the summer. And so I had a bunch of credit card debt, that private loan or personal loan, and then that piece of equipment. I should be good. Truck breaks down. That was 10 grand. And then hot water heater went out. And all of a sudden I only had $17,000 to get me through the summer.
Wow.
Well, I find myself towards the end of July, from a Thursday to a Monday, I only had $12 in the bank account. And July is not a good time to run out of money for a firewood company. And
not in the South, I was like, that's for sure. Yeah.
And I was like, why in the world did you call me into this, God? Because here I did. I took this leap of faith, and I am screwed. I was in the fetal position for most of those 4 days and went to church on Sunday. Went up, prayed with an elder, and he was like, yeah, help the business, yada, 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 and let us not put you to the test. I went home, read about Israel putting God to the test. Israel was out in the middle of the desert. They were just hours away from watching their kids die in front of their eyes from dehydration. And a lot of times we read those stories and we're like, they just saw the Nile parted like a couple of weeks ago or whatever it is. Like, why do they doubt? Like, literally, their kids are about to die in front of their eyes. Of course, they're freaking out. We would. I realized that basically I was doing the same thing they were doing. I had a good reason, a good excuse, but I was doubting God's goodness, and I broke down and wept. And next day, restaurant calls and puts in, at the time, my by far largest order, about $2,000. And they were decorating with firewood. And while I was doing that delivery, guy says, hey, I want you to buy my firewood company. I was like, well, we're kind of fancy firewood. I don't know if your customers would buy from me. Turns out this company had been around for a while. And if you Googled firewood, his company came up first.
Oh,
and I knew that once he said who he was. And he said, I'll sell you my business for $45,000. And I was like, whoa, 45,000. I have $2,012 in the bank account. Not even sure that's enough to get me to the winter. And I was like, but clearly this is God. So yeah, I'll buy your business. And made some sales, got a loan from basically like almost like an online loan shark. And I was able to buy them for $19,000. The first 4 years of the business was like that. Hardcore manual labor, and wife a couple of years at home with kids, some of the time pregnant, working 50 plus hours. I was gone working 100, 120 hours a week doing hard manual labor. I like working out. And one year I ended August at 210 pounds. And by the end of the year, so 4 months later, I was 170 pounds from just brutal manual labor, stress, just killing myself, not having enough money, it falling out of the sky. For the first 4 years, that's what it was, just nonstop. 2017, I went to my wife and said, hey, we need to take this to the next level. I know you're 8 months pregnant with our third daughter. Let's sell our house and invest it in the business.
Wow.
And so that's what we did. And that's really when we took it to the next level, and deliveries went from the 2 hours to now they're about 15 minutes a piece. And then skip ahead to 2019, started putting out yard signs all around Atlanta and started shipping across the country. And 2020 happened. Yeah, we exploded because of COVID. So we now over half of our revenue is shipping across the country, both,
Oh,
and we
wow.
really got into cooking wood in a big way.
I think a couple things that really stood out there to me were you talked about kind of arriving at that it kind of happened for you based on, those federal changes. But when I hear that, I hear the intersection of opportunity and persistence is, what we call luck, right? But
Absolutely.
it sounds like to me what happened was, and there are a couple businesses in Atlanta that are subject to this, an online gambling business that I'm familiar with in Atlanta, that when the federal government deregulated sports betting, or at least, put that back on the state, this guy was toiling, for years on, a online sports betting application. And all of a sudden, boom, it's time for his company to take it to the moon, right? And then they're doing it, and it isn't luck, and just like you said earlier, how God was kind of pointing you in that direction and continuing to guide you in that mission. It's the intersection of a lot of hard work, probably some divine intervention, which some may call luck, but I don't think we do. And the persistence to not give up on a dream or a mission, right? And
Yep.
I think recently, over the last couple of years, I've realized within businesses how important a mission is and how important to each individual that is a part of that business to believe in that mission and be invigorated by that mission, because it's what drives us in the moments where we are working 120 hours a week and we are, doing manual labor and we are out there sweating and constantly not sleeping. And, I
Yep.
talk about how when I was learning how to build software, my wife used to go to sleep by the light of my computer because I was constantly reading and trying to learn how to, build software.
Yep.
So no, I mean, I think that's one of those things that no one ever sees. And this is in the startup world, they call it the 3-year overnight success, but they don't see the 3 years that it took to hit the point of inflection of,
Yep.
a federal, deregulation of something, or finally finding the message that resonates with your customer. And I think the other thing that, when you were talking about what you think about the experience that you're trying to replicate for other people, I think what that reminds me of, there's a book called Story Brand. I can't remember who it's by, but it's a famous book that talks about, people really love the story associated with it, but not just that. You have to be able to place people in the moments that your product will be valuable for them. One of the beautiful things about the story that you tell is that the object that you've created, the thing you're selling, does not change, but depending on who interacts with it, depending on the moment, right? The tone and the memories that are created are completely different. Like you said, when your children show up, it becomes fun. It becomes this moment of camaraderie. And then when your older children put their phones down and they have a conversation and they learn, there's almost reverence in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
meditation in that moment. And then when your wife shows up and it becomes a romantic moment between you and someone that you love deeply, right? And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting how whoever is in the context of that conversation, but around that object, changes the actual experience itself, and it creates those memories. I think Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect, and I was an architecture major before I turned into a software engineer, he used to talk about the fireplace being the central element in homes, not because you could hang a TV over it and all of you stare at it, right? Because of the experience during his time that it created. It created the opportunity for camaraderie, romanticism, fun, excitement, all of those things in different contexts. So that's really beautiful. At what point in time did you decide that it was time for you to, not do the kind of traditional, I'm an individual, I'm a sole proprietor, and I'm going after this? Like, when did you decide to flip it to an actual business entity? Was that early on in the process? Did you go ahead and, like, do it yourself, or how did you take on just the business functions of this business?
I always saw it as growing and having potential of going national. I didn't have a clear pathway. It was definitely fuzzy, to say the least. It was the old tip of the iceberg and everything underneath was fuzzy and not very clear, but I knew there was something there. 2017, when I reinvented how to deliver firewood locally, I definitely got a clearer picture of how it could grow and scale. It was basically take what I was building, and really that it started in 2017 and through 18 and 19. We continue to improve it every year, but really got the, I guess, blueprint to that we could replicate in different cities. And then in 2019, when we started shipping it, at first I wasn't very confident that was going to work. But then when it exploded in 2020, I saw that between those two different strategies, that it could become a national brand. Hopefully, will become well known everywhere. So it came in stages. I wanted it to become big from the beginning, but it's become more and more clear as time's gone on.
I think this is again pointing towards that idea that it always takes longer than we expect it to. And our ambitions, while are amazing because they drive us towards that mission, our ambitions are typically ahead of our abilities at times. And it's our goal as entrepreneurs to continue to use our ambition as fuel to continue to push those businesses forward, because whether that ambition or that mission comes to fruition, within 12 months of you starting, or 48 months of you starting, or 6 years of you starting, right? It doesn't matter, because that was what it took to get to that point, and you met your goals, right? And so I think that's super cool. What was it like buying that business? I know it sounded like, you didn't have enough money to do it. There's a leap of faith that happened in that moment, but it sounds like there was some kind of metric or some kind of, obviously being first place in Google matters for your business, right? So like there's a strategic element to that as well. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Important thing to know if you're first starting out is it's a small percentage of the population, just a few percentage points. Very successful entrepreneurs are generally either a visionary or they're an operator. A visionary more sees the vision. An operator is somebody who can come in, is naturally inclined to make it happen. A visionary, if they get stuff done, it's just through like basically be perceived as just being stubborn, but it's really having the determination and just through willpower making things come about. It's that kind of what you're saying is making your luck happen, where you're just throwing stuff against the wall until it sticks. You're beating your head against that brick wall until it finally starts giving away. There's so much that kind of what you were saying earlier was it takes longer than you think it's going to. Really part of it becoming a true entrepreneur and growing, I guess, in maturity as a mature entrepreneur is learning to embrace the suck. That you have to get comfortable with things sucking sometimes. And even through my business, I've had ups and downs. I mean, hundreds of them, where I'm like, second year in business, I made a 6-figure profit, which is usually businesses take 5 years. And I thought I was like big stuff. Not that actually went to my head or anything, but it really raised my confidence. And then I had several years where I was just struggling and barely surviving after that, financially. And just up, down, up, down. There's an analogy that I heard early on, and I really like it, is in ancient times, generals would, after they would sell their soldiers somewhere, they would burn the boats so that their option was win or die. And you have to have that. It's actually crazy. If you have a safety net, you will lean into it instead of so you have to not have a backup plan in order to sometimes make crazy things work. That's how and it's actually crazy. Like most entrepreneurs are immigrants to the United States or the children of immigrants, and they don't have a safety net. And that's one of the reasons that they become entrepreneurs. You have to be like, this is what I'm doing. And if I fail, I'm going to pick myself up and do it again until it's successful.
Well, I mean, what's interesting? I talked to an entrepreneur yesterday. They'd raised over $10 million in the last couple of months for a piece of software that they had developed. One of the things they talked about was the concept of because of the industry that they're in like artificial intelligence, they were able to raise a bit faster in a different way than some of these normal startups are, because right now that's an important like part of the current culture. Like a lot of people are thinking about this problem. He said,
Yep.
but one of the things that was important, even though they had been toiling on this business for 3 or 4 years now, was that they skipped a step. And one of the concerns is that because they skipped a step, meaning like a seed round investment, they really went to a Series A style round investment. The concern was, hey, had they missed the opportunity or the learning opportunity that existed between them and their co-founders and them and the rest of the employees within the business, to feel the pain that they needed to feel to teach them the things they needed to teach during that time, to be resilient once they were able to acquire the funding needed to really grow and go after the vision that they're going towards.
Yep.
And I think that what people don't realize is that the time, whether it is long or short, is actually a necessary element of actually creating your business, right? It isn't just an inevitability, right? It's not just like, oh, time is time. It's actually
Yes.
purposeful, right? You need
Yep.
to learn the inertia, the pain points, as well as your customer, right? It takes time to learn your customer. A couple things that I get out of all of your story is it's not easy for people to recognize opportunities. And when I think in retrospect about what you're talking about with what is the brand of firewood, right? And what was the traditional way to do it? And then I see how you looked at an opportunity to actually change the way people think about this, and change how people interact with that resource. I think
Yep.
about like that is so visionary and trailblazing, right? Like I've never in my life ever thought about it outside the context of bundles sitting outside of the back of a pickup truck. Normally that is a white pickup truck with a beat up a bed, and it's on the corner on an intersection somewhere, and they're selling them for $20 a bundle or whatever the number is, right? When I think about that, that's how I had thought about it before. You looked at it as an opportunity, which is super cool. And your business is going great. I mean, like we've had, conversations about just how great it's grown. And I think it's just one of the most interesting side hustle, or excuse me, hustle businesses, right? If I were to go pitch somebody luxury firewood or upmarket firewood or anything in that tone, someone
Yep.
would laugh at me, right? But what's real about it is that there are people that see beautiful firewood and it changes the emotional perspective that they address a place. I think about
Yep.
every great barbecue place that I've ever been in had this stack of immaculate wood that sat over next to it. I was like, dude, that stuff, that hickory smells good and it looks good. Like that's really cool. I think that's super cool, man. I really appreciate you sharing that story. So I've got a couple questions I'm going to ask you real quick. They're just kind of, not this stuff, not the business story side, but normally I have some lessons associated with, different types of things that I interact with. So tell me about what's your favorite documentary?
It has to be Chernobyl.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cool. 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 It is such a cool
Although,
story.
yeah, it is a great story, and he did, even though it's a sad story, he had his vision and definitely had persistence.
Yeah.
He did the right thing, and he had the persistence, I guess, is
Yeah.
what I like about it.
So tell me about what's your favorite book. Now, I normally point towards business books because I really want to try to help people figure out how to,
Yep.
get over something. But if it's fictional, whether it taught, if it taught you something, tell me about that.
My favorite book would definitely be fictional, but I would say Good to Great is
Yeah. It's a
is
great
my
book.
favorite.
Yeah.
It's an old one, but it's a good one, and it just has so many fun fundamentals.
Something that should never be overlooked with books is that there are always lessons to be learned with whatever you're reading, right? What even if it's negative, right?
Yep.
What not to do, what is it, the old famous, now people say is completely not true, was Thomas Edison figured out 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb before he made a light bulb. And then there's also a lot of historical reference behind who all went into making that light bulb. And so like
Yep.
I think I think it is important that we always look at books, regardless of whether they're old or new, with the lens of it's my opportunity to learn something that I didn't know before. So
Absolutely.
tell me where people can find you. How can they get in contact with you? How can they go
Yep.
buy Cutting Edge Firewood? And if there's anything else that you'd like to share, as far as how to get in touch with you or what you guys are up to, coming up in the next couple months, please feel free to.
Definitely the best place to buy firewood or cooking wood or pizza wood is on cuttingedgefirewood.com. If you want to connect with me, I am on LinkedIn under Leroy Hite.
Awesome. I'm Billy Boozer. This is the Hustle Mob podcast. If you are interested in finding out more about Hustle Mob, please go to hustlemob.com and go pre-register for your username. We're building a community for entrepreneurs, just like when Leroy started out this business, building better tools for the earliest stage entrepreneur, the 30 million, people that have single employee businesses, the 24 million sole proprietorships in the United States. We're building better tools and community to help you move that business from side hustle that it is now to a real business that helps support your family. And I can't thank Leroy enough for showing up and telling us his amazing story. And I really appreciate it. So go check out Cutting Edge Firewood. And I really appreciate all of y'all's time today. Y'all have an absolutely fantastic day. See ya.